Welcome to INN's Student. INN Student is a platform for law students to come here and deliver a lecture on the topic of their choice. Today we have with us law student Vaibhav Agrawal. He is going to speak on shadow shipping and legal challenges in international commercial trade. He is from Subhash Desai College of Law. So without wasting further time, I would request him to commence with his lecture. Thank you.
Greetings to one and all. This is Vaibhav Agrawal from Subhash Desai College of Law, and today I bring on your dais a very imperative subject for the era, rather I should say for the seas, because international commercial trade constitutes 90% of the global affairs through sea routes, and in today's era or in today's generation of sailing, what we have now witnessed is shadow shipping. That might sound a bit interesting to you because shadow shipping is something which was prevailing in the earlier times as well. Even in the ancient era, we have seen the Portuguese, the Dutch, and even some other coastal and also island nations who have performed acts of shadow shipping, but the term wasn't coined back then. So here are we with today's subject, that is shadow shipping. Now there's another interesting angle to shadow shipping, which is ghost fleeting. Now, the question is, why is it ghost fleeting or shadow shipping? Any vessel that sails in the high seas or in the territorial waters under the shadow, under a concealment, can be termed as a shadow ship or a ghost ship. By ghost, what we mean to say is something that is unidentifiable. Now, the moment I say it is unidentifiable, friends, what I'm trying to mention here is it has breached several laws. Because there are protocols, there are regulations, and are those just coastal regulations? Absolutely not. You have your international treaties, you have your conventions, you have your regulations set by the IMO, that is International Maritime Organization, and also the respective jurisdictions of the coastal or the island nations. So let's go step by step here and understand what exactly in essence is this shadow shipping. Now, shadow shipping, firstly, I would like to bring your attention to why there is a need, first of all, to operate a particular vessel that cannot be identified. There are regulations that when a vessel goes out on a sail, is carrying some consignment which is being, I would say, discharged from the port of loading and till the port of discharge by the shipper or the consignor to the consignee. See, there are innumerable contracts, innumerable documents that have to come into practice. You have your bill of lading, you have your charter party, you have your LC, you also have your entire invoices and your POs, and you have your customs approval, your health certifications. Are these the ones which are in question? No. What is actually in question is the commodity itself. You have various raw materials as commodities. You have your gas, you have your crude oils. Now the crude oil, if it is coming from a sanctioned nation, then it does not have the approval of either export or being imported to say a second or the third world country. Again, it is subjective. Now what do I exactly mean by sanctioned countries, sanctioned nations? Sanction has two respective definitions, literally. One sanctioning is giving some sort of an approval, and the other set of sanction means that you are restricting a particular nation or restricting a particular good from being exported or leaving its territorial seas. So now you would question that if the particular respective nation is sanctioned, and you rightly said that, oh, it cannot export certain commodity, why even allow it? The point here is that shadow shipping, it serves with this purpose. It is the exact reciprocation to this problem. Why? Because they have something known as flag of convenience. Now, flag of convenience means the vessel owner would be some other country, but the flag they are waving on their vessel belongs to some other country. Here the identification becomes a problem. And in order to arrest a vessel, arresting of a vessel may happen in two cases. Either the respective, the involved parties, some of them have defaulted on the payment terms. So you may arrest the vessel, which means you may halt the vessel, restrict its movement unless and until the X amount is being received by the damaged party. Or number two, when any illicit, illegal or sanctioned good is found. So, in order to arrest a vessel, first I should have the jurisdiction over the waters. Maximum of these shadow ships, they are operating in the high seas. And high seas, my friends, have no specific jurisdiction. Let me tell you, even in the United Nations Conventions of Law of the Sea, that is your UNCLOS, it applies to the signatory parties. It cannot apply to those who have not yet signed or are not directly vested by the interests of UN. So these are some problems. Now, how are these shadow fleets operating? Because one particular vessel is having thousands of crores of worth commodity. And this is very interesting that how they are doing this. Again, as I mentioned, it is not something which is unknown, but yet sometimes it gets shadowed. So here, number one, if I am into an international trade, there is certainly an exchange of goods against a consideration or against a barter. So the currency here either would be cryptocurrencies or it would be the local currency. Because not every time you can deal in US dollars. I am speaking for those who are into shadow shipping. Now, is the currency the only highlighted problem? No, even the vessel itself. Because the vessels, if you see, have certain age limit. After 15 years or 18 years, a vessel ideally is barred from operating unless and until they have the permission after due care and maintenance. But these shadow vessels, the shadow fleet or the ghost ships, they do not carry forth any such maintenance or I would say care clearances. So the vessel itself is outdated. Then you are dealing with the local currency, difficult to trace, or you are using cryptos, or you are using other, like you have SPFS or you have CIPS, you also have SWIFT, you also have SEPAM. All of these things can be used. So again, detection becomes difficult. Now if I move forward, there are exchange offices. Now what are these exchange offices doing? They offer a definite opportunity to launder a weak local currency into a hard one. So most of my illicit activity is here justified. And also, just a few minutes back what I mentioned, barter. Okay, fair, I do not want the currency, I do not want the consideration in cash or in whatsoever the case may be. Rather, I could just barter. But how is the barter? Can it just be crude oil against gas? Well, that is up to those who are dealing in this, and it's absolutely dependent on how and what is the quantum or what is the overall forum of the trade. So let's come to the most essential element or aspect of part of this particular session. What will be the legal complications when you are operating a shadow vessel or a ghost ship? Needless for me to say now, by this time you all might have been cleared that so many international treaties and the coastal regulations would have been violated. And yes, that is the case. Because it's not just the flag of convenience. It is also flag hopping, falsified documents. We have to understand, if someone is buying a particular commodity from a sanctioned nation, certainly the documentation would have malified practices or any sort of, there could be also adulteration in the commodity itself upon demand or misrepresentation. So these are not great things. Just for your general knowledge, even the original seal, which is generally done either at the CFS or by the customs, even that gets duplicated very easily. But these are matters of debates and endless arguments because it's a matter of governance rather than a matter of private enterprise. Now, as I mentioned, there are several treaties which get violated. Now, what are these treaties? First of all, the United Nations, the European Union, and also the United States and the United Kingdom, that is the OFSI. These all treaties and conventions get naturally violated. There were a couple of quite popular cases that you all might have come across, where it is a privilege to witness these cases in real time because there is a distinction of what can be termed as a territorial sea, a continental shelf, and a high sea. But coastal nations they do have the privilege to extend the territorial seas with more 24 nautical miles. So in reality, or being pragmatic enough, your area of jurisdiction enhances. Now, many a times these trades, it's not just like, okay, there is a port of loading, now you on board the port, the containers on the vessel, and it's out in the high seas, now the port of discharge where the commodities have to be getting off the shelf and they will be discharged at the respective port. That's how shadow fleets operate. No. It is mostly a ship-to-ship transfer. There are two ships, they are going to meet in the high sea, and there is where the exchange of commodity takes place. Now, how does that happen? It's better if you ask them, because I myself am not involved into such activities. There is also something which I would like to bring your utmost attention to, is port state jurisdiction obligations. Now, what does it state? See, there is Article 94 of the UNCLOS, United Nations Convention of Law of the Sea. Flag states often fail to exercise effective jurisdiction and control over such vessels. Now, why? Because certainly there might be presence of some or the other corruption that would be taking place in layman terms, or there would be jurisdictional limitations, my dear friends, in detaining or even inspecting these vessels that conceal the ownership or falsify registration details. Even this is important. Now let me come to a very, very important part. एक क्वेश्चन ये भी आ सकता है कि all right, we agree that the flag is different, we agree that these respective vessels are unregistered, we agree that the flag of convenience exists, but we are living in the era of tech. We have open sources, we have open platforms, there is a website, I would not name it, where you can easily trace the vessels. So in 2025, how aren't we able to trace these vessels? Because vessels are traced by AIS transponders. Now these AIS transponders are of utmost importance. How? Let me take you back to 2009 attacks of Mumbai. 26/11 that happened. Generally the fishing boats are up to the size of 20 meters. So the government came up with this policy that now what you will have to do is all the vessels which are beyond 20 meters in length have to install mandatorily the AIS transponders so that we can identify that where are these vessels in the high seas, because it's all satellite imagery. But even that got corrupt. They were hopping those signals. How? Because in order to get these AIS transponders on a cheaper rate, we took it, or most of these fishermen took it from the adversary. I would not like to name the nation. And what that adversary did in turn, started to identify our vessels as their own vessels. So the government said, all right, chalo, we'll bring up the subsidiary. But this is a global practice. AIS transponders are the best way of vessel detection, and even they are absolutely jumped, they are absolutely hopped, and they are absolutely manipulated. And let me bring this to your attention under IMO, that is the International Maritime Organization Resolution A115932 and the International Anti-Money Laundering Standards, the inability to establish transparency of ownership constitutes a serious breach. We also have SOLAS, that is safety of life at sea. We have MARPOL, that is the International Convention for Preventing Pollution via Ships. Don't you think that all of these particular practices would be taking account? Because shadow ship है, वो तो वैसे भी नहीं पता चलेगा कहाँ है, कहाँ आई, कहाँ से गई. So we have the MARPOL Convention Annex 1 that states concealment of illegal oil discharges or pollution incidents and national criminal law on maritime fraud, falsification of navigational data, and obstruction of enforcement authorities. All of this in a nutshell gets violated. But what are these impacting? Number one, the impact your maritime domain awareness. Needless for me to say, if the navigation isn't being appropriately measured, awareness gets impacted. You have the ISPS code and the SUA Convention of 1988. All of these things get, I would say, corrupted rather. shadow shipping is not just a matter of international or malified practices in international trade, but also a matter of somewhere terrorism, because you don't know, if you cannot understand what commodity is being carried, you may also not be able to decode who, for a matter of fact, is on board. Because the MDA efforts comprising not only safety of navigation but also international anti-terrorism and anti-piracy frameworks. These are also points that have to be considered. The Somalian piracy cases are at most examples of the same. The Somalian states earlier, please go back to history, you will realize they were fishermen. They used to do fishing. But hazardous chemicals in huge quantities being released into those seas obstructed them from fishing, and thereby something happened which turned into piracy. Would not like to justify of what happened, but these are collateral damages that the world witnesses. And when we talk about vessels, we have to talk about the P&I clubs. So what is mentioned is that vessels engaged in shadow operations are generally uninsurable. Now you have the insurance and also the reinsurance. Many states have this law that unless and until your cargo or your vessel is insured, you cannot put it into waters. So now when we speak of vessels, we cannot ignore the P&I clubs. And let me quote what has been inked, that vessels engaged in shadow operations are generally uninsurable. Friends, many coastal and island nations have made it a mandate that if you are a vessel owner, your vessel, if it's a shipping line or freight forwarder, whatever it may be, if your commodities, if your vessel, if it's not insured, you cannot put them to waters. You cannot give it into waters. So this is uninsurable under international group of P&I clubs. Why? Due to non-compliance with international law and sanction restrictions. Common sense. But here, see, there is an absence of, valid civil liability coverage for pollution, collision or wreck removal. And this is under the CLC 1992 and also the Bunker Convention 2001. It is to be understood, dear friends, that it's not just a matter of trade. As we mentioned, it's of anti-piracy as well. It's also a matter of pollution as well. And when it's pollution, it's also a matter of environment as well. And let me go back to my statement. All of this is uninsured. Now you have the reinsurance industry coming in. So an uninsured vessel who does not have any liability for any damages or any of these fraudulent activities, how are you going to track them down? And denial of claims by legitimate insurers citing breach of warranty or illegality of voyage. Also here I would like to mention the exposure of cargo interest in ports. Not necessarily every time it's an STS, that is the ship-to-ship transfer of the commodities. That would be preposterous for me to say. And gives me a bit of amnesia, but yes, it's so true that under SOLAS, that is the safety of life at sea, that those standards, they're presenting the heightened risk of collisions. Not just collisions, oil spills also, that comes into the MARPOL. That is the International Convention for Prevention of Pollution through Ships. So these are all exclusively, I would say, the biggest demerits and backlashes of shadow shipping. But let's say you catch hold of one, or let's say there is some sort of a arbitral dispute that you get into. What happens when such contractual disputes have your shadow vessels, such as your unpaid freight, such as your cargo contamination or demurrage? Now demurrage is what? Just for you to understand, if my container is being put off the vessel on the port, so the time that container is going to be on the port, there will be demurrage charges beyond the scope of my contract. And each day has thousands of dollars of demurrage charges being imposed. So that is very difficult to address. We have seen many businesses lapse because of this. So unidentifiable or untraceable ownership is there, invalid or unenforceable charter party clauses. Why? because the entire charter party is based on legalities, and when the vessel or the commodity itself is under the umbrella and the bracket of shadow shipping or ghost shipping, everything becomes void ab initio. So here there is one important convention, that is the New York Convention of 1958, that comes into picture, and hence there is a threat, and this is an absolute threat to the maritime governance and rule of law, not just with regards to IMO but also with regards to the International Chamber of Shipping, the World Trade Organization principles that have been outlined, and the proliferation of shadow shipping that creates a dual maritime economy, friends. How? One that is compliant and transparent, and another is opaque and illicit. So these are all long-term risks, not just to trade but to ethical practice, to life, to commodities, to the environment, and most importantly to the law and the governance. Thank you very much.
Vaibhav, thank you very much, because it was a really a unique and a complicated topic, because shadow shipping, international laws, international conventions, and the entire presentation was really beautiful and a very unique presentation for that.
Grateful, sir.
So, small token from Hammurabi to you.
Much obliged, sir. Thank you.
Please.